Now on to our third point. Point number 3.
We go from one disaster to another, or perhaps from disaster to farce disaster.
Yeah. The story of Alaska and Washington summits. Point 3, the story of just let me finish. Point 3, the story of Alaska and Washington summits. As Glenn said, a farce, even more than a disaster. Over to you, Glenn.
Well, so Donald Trump has said, we all have heard many times, in fact, it was 53 times during his campaign, that it would take him 24 hours to solve the war in Ukraine, or Russia's invasion of Ukraine. He then said something that he tends to say with regularity also, is no one knew that the problem was so complex after 6 months of flailing and achieving nothing. So there were 2 summits that Donald Trump held, one in Anchorage with Vladimir Putin, the president of Russia, and one in Washington with the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, and in haste, several of the key leaders of Europe and NATO, European countries and NATO. What were the results of, and the objective of each meeting was to find a peace agreement, terms to end the war going on in Ukraine between Russia and Ukraine. The results have been no peace. There's no agreement in view whatsoever, no change whatsoever.
To warn our listeners, we will overshoot. So those of you who want can stay on, because this is a consequential month. This has been a historic month, and therefore we will overshoot. Those of you who want to go can go at 1 p.m., but we'll crack
on. So no peace came out of this whatsoever. There's no agreement at all, none in view. However, Russia has been partially rehabilitated from its international pariah status by the man in the Oval Office, Donald Trump. The United States aligned itself, as it has done for a decade under Donald Trump, verbatim to the last iota with Russia's positions. But then at the same time, the United States agreed to sell American weapons material to NATO members, which NATO members could then give, if they wish, to Ukraine. So at the same time, the U.S. is aligning itself with Russia and agreeing to provide weapons to Ukraine to oppose Russia, which is, of course, totally incoherent. What's the substance of all of this? There were 5 participants, actually, at the 2 summits. There was Russia, the United States, Ukraine, key European, NATO and European member countries, and Donald Trump's ego. And I say that because it does get a smile, but it also is absolutely true. And that his ego was the most important driver and objective of the 2 summits. And I'm not being facetious. Each participant pursued larger objectives, and often incompatible ones, than merely peace between Ukraine and Russia, which all would like on their own terms. The Russian President Putin sought to end his diplomatic isolation, to improve relations with the United States, to advance his view of the root causes of the Russia-Ukraine war, which means that Ukraine does not exist as a society or a legitimate country and the government is illegitimate, to achieve peace on his terms, which means that we will absorb Ukraine, Russia, and to undermine the normative system of international relations that has haltingly obtained since 1945 and replace it with a sphere of interest system which Russia's influence in Central Europe, at least, would be preponderant, and Russia would have a roughly equal influence and status with that of the United States, although it is 1/40th the size economically, or who knows what it is. Putin has a chance to achieve all these goals because Donald Trump has for decades parroted Russian positions, and he has more than a Freudian affinity for strongmen and for Vladimir Putin, and the Russian connection I talked about other times. The United States sought to end the war in Ukraine. United States government, but the United States government was largely irrelevant in this. Under Donald Trump, this has meant that the United States aligned its positions with those of Russia. That's literally the case. And also, the consequence was weakening America's commitment to NATO and to European defense. Although the European leaders succeeded in stopping that from going as far as it may have. Ukraine, of course, sought to maintain its independence and its capability to resist, which meant maintaining its critical alliance with the United States so that it could receive aid. And it wanted to avoid anything which would weaken its sovereignty over even the territories that are its legally, but it doesn't currently control. The EU and NATO leaders, who invited themselves in haste to try to avoid the giveaway of Ukraine and the triumph of Russia, sought to maintain U.S. commitment to NATO and to stop the United States from trying to impose a peace favorable to Russia. And the most important player in all of this was Donald Trump, who sought a peace agreement before having worked out either a U.S. position or any tentative accord among any of the interested parties. But his really his primary objective was to focus the world's spotlight on him, to be the man in the center, to whom everyone had to appear to make obeisance to be the flame around which all moths turned and flew. And if the result helped his friend Vladimir, so much the better. And if it guaranteed Ukraine's independence, well, okay. Now the consequence, and then I think I can bring us to an end. The consequence in substance was for Ukraine and Russia in their war essentially zero at present. There is no peace agreement, and it continues to recede with the horizon as the artillery shells fly and their drones fly over the Donbass, and the Russians send 1,000 people a day into Ukrainian drones and machine guns to die. But he did succeed, Trump did succeed in holding a conference at which he was the center of attention. And then the final consequence was a continuing fraying of the United States credibility, trust, and the faith that other countries have in it, and in what remains of the tattered normative system, rather now being replaced by Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping's objective, a sphere of influence system where power determines who has predominance.
Glenn, I mean, yes, Donald Trump did all of that, but it's very clear that in the Alaska summit, Vladimir Putin had the upper hand. One person looked rather cheery. It was, as one of my friends, British friends, summed it up, from the photo, even before reading any news report, he said it was clear which cat got the cream. The photograph, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, that photo said it all. And the reality is that Donald Trump has little leverage now against Vladimir Putin because he doesn't want to send arms and money to Ukraine. And when it comes to the Europeans are effete. That is indubitably true. You do not have a Charles de Gaulle as a European leader. You do not have Europeans who want to fight and die. You do not have Europeans who are willing to put money. The popularity of most European leaders at home is near rock bottom. I mean, look at Keir Starmer. There are people within his party talking of replacing him. His popularity is going down. That of Nigel Farage is going up. You look at Emmanuel Macron. He does not have much credibility anymore within France. He's despised as President Jupiter, the Jupiterian president, or whatever he claimed to be. You go to Christopher Merz, he barely squeaked through and got his majority at the second attempt. And Germans, yes, the Germans are investing more in defense, but AfD is on the rise, and AfD, we know, believes that Germany should take Russian gas and focus on the economy and kick immigrants out. So Europe is no longer as cohesive as it was. Europe no longer has the ability to take the pain. Europe is an aging continent, and therefore European leaders were genuflecting so abjectly in front of Donald Trump, who's clearly someone they don't exactly admire or even like. I mean, look at all their comments before the elections and look at how they are groveling at his feet. So yes, I agree with you, all of this has happened, but there are wheels within wheels. And it is clear that the war in Ukraine is not going well for Ukrainians. They simply don't have enough men. The men have fled the country. Far too many. They are getting 60-plus-year-olds. So it's a grim situation. And the consequences are going to be grimmer. And talking about the rules-based order, if the president is not following the rules at home, if he's ordered, and we didn't talk about this at all, we forgot that he's ordered National Guard in Washington, D.C. I see them when I walk around. I say hello to them. They're perfectly pleasant. They've come in to just stand at street corners. If you have a collapse of law internally, it's really hard to say there's a normative order externally, given all that's going on. So we are living fin de siècle sort of way. We are living in an order akin to pre-World War One, or we could say, I wouldn't say pre-World War Two, when a certain order was crumbling. We didn't know what would follow. By 1920, women had the votes, and a certain Winston Churchill had opposed votes for women, and a suffragette had nearly thrown him in front of an onrushing train. But fast forward 1920, women had the vote. And of course, Churchill changed his mind because women voted for him in large numbers. And so he said, if I had known so many of them would vote the right way, or words to that effect, I would have supported their vote. So maybe we are living at some Zeitenwende, but we don't know where the winds or where the age will turn. We don't know where the zeitgeist will take us, but certainly the old order is dead, and we don't know what new order is to be born.
So all happy news. We could have talked about the Starship launch, and then that would have been a bit of positive news. But then we would have to talk about AI and how we're all going to become drones to artificial intelligence. But that's our survey of the darkening clouds.
Exactly. And we will see you a month hence in September. Thank you very much. See you anon.
Join the conversation at Fair Observer and subscribe to our YouTube channel.